Hello and welcome to another episode of Sexual Confidence on Tap with Shannon, Ethridge, and friends. And I am back with my friends, Julie Seibert and Pastor Angie McCarty. And today's topic may seem like a slight detour from our theme all summer long, but it's really not, because when we talk about summer lovin', we also have to talk about summer fighting, because I don't know about y'all, but it really doesn't need to be summertime in order for me to find something to fight about.
I was gonna say, Shannon, do you and Charlie only fight in the summer? Is that like you have boundaries on that?
Nope.
June to August.
Fair game. So yeah, we're going to talk about fighting like lovers do, because inevitably it happens to all of us, to the best of us. I would actually be concerned about a couple who never has tension. I would say that those are two incredibly passive people pleasers who probably don't have a lot of good tension in their relationship, unless of course you're one of those people who have just evolved to a very high mature state of being and existing with one another. If that's you, well, those people probably don't listen to our show. Let's just be real.
Yeah.
I think the people who listen to our show are probably like us, that on any given day, it doesn't take much for that spark to turn into a flame or a raging fire of anger. And so let's talk about how best to fight like lovers do. The idea being that it eventually works toward a reconciliation and even the all famous makeup sex. Julie, you had mentioned that makeup sex is a regular thing in your house. I guess that means that fighting is a regular thing in your house.
Well, I will say we have had some really good makeup sex, and I definitely, we would fall in the camp of we have our fair share of ups and downs and disagreements, and so yeah, I do think it is good to learn how to fight well and learn how to make up well, and we're in process with that as well. So yeah, definitely. You want to know some ideas I have on conflict and how to
press the pause button before we do that?
Okay.
I wanted to ask if y'all had any interesting or funny stories when I was looking at this topic. What came to my mind first is my parents' very first argument in their marriage, and they were married for like 56 years before my dad died. Their very first argument came up as a topic of conversation every time we passed a pasture full of cattle. So like I was constantly reminded about their first argument. So my dad was in the military in Tripoli, North Africa, and my mom was in Alabama, and it was her cousin that got them writing to each other. So his first trip into town, he proposed to her, and his second trip into town was their wedding. So they were on their honeymoon, having had very little time around each other. And my dad was raised in Texas. And so, I mean, they both have Southern accents, but an Alabama accent and a Texas accent is, believe it or not, somewhat different. So they passed by this pasture full of cattle, and my mom said, "Oh, look at that Brahma bull." And my dad said, "There's no such thing." And my mother swore up and down, "I beg to differ. My daddy raised those." And my dad was just like, "You're crazy." So it turned into this big argument that I think that my dad stormed out of the car when they stopped to get gas, because he just was so upset about this argument that they were having about this ridiculous thing. He thought that she said, "Look at those mama bulls." And he was ready to like die on that hill of there's no such thing as a mama bull, because bulls are male. But she was saying Brahma bull. So sometimes you just have to realize that the communication just gets skewed when it's two different people talking. So I think it begs the question, do you want to be right or do you want to be connected? If my dad had just been like, "Yeah, whatever," then maybe their first fight wouldn't have happened so quickly.
Well, I do think something you said, Shannon, is so true. And I always, in coaching and in, writing and stuff, I always say to couples, it's like, you really have to decide which mountains you're going to die on the side of. Because I think sometimes, especially early in marriage, or maybe when we're younger, before we develop some of the skills, you want to die on the side of a lot of mountains. And you realize, oh my goodness, if we're going to spend our marriage, both of us wanting to die on the side of so many mountains and be right, it's going to make for a long, tense union or a short union. Depending on how you look at it, it's like, that's the last mountain I'm dying on.
Short, unhappy union, for sure.
Right.
So Shannon, put a pin in your parents' story there, because I want to come back to that.
Okay.
But I saw the funniest thing on Facebook, a little meme. It was a cartoon, and it was two praying mantises, what's the plural? There were two of them.
Praying mantis.
Yeah,
And
two of them. Female and a male.
Female and a male. And the male kills the female after they have.
Oh, I think it's the other way, isn't
the
it?
male. It's the female black
female
widow.
kill.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And then, okay, wait.
Yeah, the female can't be killed, or else the babies would be killed too.
One
so
of
yeah.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Okay, so forget all of that.
No, you're good. Keep going. Push through.
And the caption under this little cartoon is, "After we have sex, but before I kill you, I'm going to need your help with some shelves."
Yeah, right.
That's good.
Like
that
like
is good.
Inner nature that rules their world, but then the practicalities of stuff has to get done.
Right.
And please do it before I kill you.
Right. Right. I love it.
Conflict, let me just make clear, when we have conflict with our partners, killing them is not an option.
No,
that's not what I'm advocating. Right? I have felt that way before. Not in seriousness, but oh my gosh, conflict can be so irritating and so hard and so demoralizing too.
Right.
It sometimes calls into question the entire foundation of a relationship. I know in my experience, I have a trigger every time Jonathan and I have conflict, because my first husband left. There is this pit in my stomach that I immediately go to, oh my gosh, is Jonathan going to leave too?
Right.
And 5 years into our marriage, he has learned, because I have taught him, that if at the beginning of conflict, he says, look, I'm not going to leave, here's the issue. And we talk. If that's the first thing that comes out of his mouth, that settles my heart, settles most of my anxiety. So I think part of conflict is healthy conflict is to know what your partner needs.
Yeah.
And honor that.
I love that. I loved how that one little phrase can help you exhale and settle in and listen to what he has to say, instead of this really chaotic conversation going on in your own head of, is he going to leave too? Is he going to leave too?
Right. Right. And if he doesn't say that, then I get in a spiral and genuinely can't hear anything he says, because I'm making my out plan.
Right.
Okay. If he's going to leave, then what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And it's irrational. I know this.
But we're irrational beings. I mean, who of us can honestly say that we never feel irrational, or that we never choose a hill to die on that was really more of an anthill or molehill, right? Mountain. And I think that so much of it does kind of stem back from how we felt either in previous relationships or in our previous life of just childhood was I seen? Was I heard? Were my feelings validated? And if the answer to those questions is no, I think that it's so much easier to view tension and conflict in a much more scary lens of, oh no, am I going to feel ousted from the tribe? Am I going to feel disconnected from this person too? What's wrong with me that I can't get people to validate my feelings? Whereas people who have been seen and heard and their feelings have been honored, that's what they expect. So it's just amazing how we drag our childhood baggage into adulthood.
Oh,
It's
yes. And
we're
how
basically
we
a
saw
hurting little girl trapped in a grown woman's body and a hurting little boy trapped in a grown man's body having an argument with each other. That's how it works.
and we know how well 6-year-old arguments end.
I'm gonna take my
It
toys and go home.
yeah. Yeah. Shannon, you talked about couples who don't fight. I think that my aunt and uncle haven't fought or don't fight.
Yeah.
They've been married for over 50 years. They are delightful people.
Oh.
They have 3 children, and all of their children have been married and divorced at least once. And my cousin reflected on that and said, because she never saw her parents fight, when she fought with her spouse, she thought that that was unnatural, that that's not supposed to happen, that that this was the end. So I'm not advocating fighting in front of your kids all the time, but the important thing I think to teach our children is that conflict is going to happen when you are in relationship with people.
Yes.
And this is how we hopefully resolve that conflict.
That is so true. I didn't think about the fact that parents who don't model it openly don't give their kids those skills. And I could imagine that a fight in their marriage would feel very threatening and scary when it could just be your everyday run-of-the-mill misunderstanding. Yeah.
Yep.
Julie, you're going to chime in there?
Yeah, I am. But in fact, you both kind of touched on, it was a good segue. You touched on stuff that I've been actually doing deep work with with my counselor about triggers. You mentioned that word, Angie, trigger. And that is true about some things in our past, whether it's from our childhood. And I have been learning and uncovering a lot about my past, and with my parents' divorce, and with my first marriage and my husband leaving me, and a good friendship I had that ended very badly. And what I learned is that when Randy and I, why it's such a hard trigger for me is when Randy and I are not intentional, or I feel like he's not being intentional with our relationship. I feel it's a trigger of all that stuff in the past, that I wasn't worth it, that I'm not worth it, and he's not going to fight for me. And so what I would say in relation to conflict with that is, sometimes when we're learning things about ourselves, it really helped me when I had a conversation with Randy based on this work I was doing in my own counseling, my own deep work, to be able to say, I am learning things about myself, and I want to share those with you to help you better understand me. Instead of coming at it where maybe his defenses are going to go up pretty quickly if he feels like I'm accusing him of not doing enough, or not doing it right, or not doing. Instead, if I come at it from, this is my heart of what I'm learning, very hard, difficult, deep stuff about myself, and I want to share it authentically, because I want you, my most important person, to understand me. And when we practiced that, when we did that, after I had this big growth and revelation in counseling, it really softened him. So sometimes I think how we approach making a point or bringing something up that's difficult makes all the difference in helping our partner be softer towards us. And there's no guarantees, but like my counselor reminded me, you can't control the other person, but you can take ownership for your own expression and your own behavior. And so, yeah, that's a huge tip I would say, is sometimes when we can couch it in, this is what I'm learning about me, and I want to share it because I want you to better understand me.
And that fundamentally is taking responsibility for yourself.
Right.
So when we have conflict, using those I statements, and I feel this way. Julie, thanks for sharing that. That is such a vulnerable position to be in.
Yeah.
And it's vulnerable no matter how long you've been married, no matter how long you have known your partner. yeah, it can just be scary to share that much of yourself.
Well, and
You
it's
know,
And deep
another,
down, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to build
yes,
vulnerability and safety. And here's the huge aha moment, is that when I did that, so, and this is all real fresh and recent for Randy and I on this particular thing. And when I did that, it really helped him be vulnerable with me about some of his own stuff and his own anxieties and insecurities. And so it was huge in that regard. And that's this, that's that oneness and that trying to build that. And it just creates a better foundation for navigating through conflict, because like we've said, it's not an issue of if you're going to have conflict, it's only a matter of when.
right.
And you spend your lifetime as a married couple figuring out how to navigate that, for sure.
Well,
so let's make this theological. As the pastor who is writing a doctoral thesis and feeling kind of biblically literate these days, in the story of creation, when the couple was naked and felt
Right.
shame, nakedness has so much to do with vulnerability.
Oh,
They
without a
were
doubt.
completely open. Everything was known to God. And to put yourself in that position is scary.
well,
And
I was going to say that not only is it vulnerable for you to do that, I think that it's brilliant. I think that it's almost magical
Mhm.
because you're coming at your partner, and instead of making it about them, which puts them on the defensiveness, because as Charlie has said many times, the ego's number one job is to defend itself. You're making it
Right.
about you. I'm entrusting you with something about me. That again,
Mhm.
that's magical. Talk about charming and disarming. That's, yeah, kudos to you, Julie, for doing that work, and thank you for sharing that sacred experience with us. I want to
Thank
share
you.
a formula that I have taught for many years. I derived it out of one of the most valuable books that I read during my master's in counseling, was a book called Gifts from the Heart by an author named Randy Fujishin, and it's Fuji, like Fuji Apple, Shin. And he talks about the SLACK method for arguments. So this is how it goes. It's an acronym for sit, listen, ask, compromise, kiss. So you sit because you think about when you're in a fighter stance, you're standing. And so to have a serious conversation about something that's bothering you when you're standing, that can kind of communicate in a threatening way to someone else. So to sit really communicates, hey, we're on the same level here, same playing field, kind of level the playing field, eye to eye, that sort of thing. So sit.
and can I interrupt and say sitting like this is very different than sitting openly,
Yes.
right? So all of those nonverbal cues really matter.
Absolutely. Maybe you just get a cup of coffee in your hands so that you don't do the whole arm folding thing. So the next one beyond sitting is listening. I love that quote, and maybe it was Francis of Assisi. I'm not sure. Seek first to understand rather than be understood. So the idea is that
Yeah.
you're listening and you're asking questions. You just want to make sure that you understand what your mate is trying to communicate to you. And then you come back with questions, not defenses, not, well, you do this, don't turn the tables. Just come back with questions. What I hear you say is XYZ. Am I hearing you right? And is how you feel like this, or tell me how that makes you feel. So just ask investigative questions so you can learn more. And then
My counselor describes that as being curious.
yeah, I like that.
Which feels, I love it. Like, she'll say to me, she's like, let's just be curious for a minute here. She does it to
Put
get
on your
me
Sherlock
to,
Holmes hat. Just investigate.
well, and let's say, yeah. So it's not as, it doesn't feel as harsh. It's very like inviting and opening. Like, so I think that's exactly what that is with the listening and the asking, it's like, let's be curious here.
Well, when they're good questions, I would think that it makes the person who's talking feel very validated. And that's really what we're all looking for at the end of the day, is just validation that your feelings matter. And so
Right.
or the next letter in the acronym is C, and that's compromise. Of how can we create a win-win in this situation where it's not that one loses and one wins. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's how can we work together as a team to make this equitable for both of us or satisfactory to both of us. And then the K is for kiss, of just kiss to seal the deal.
Yeah.
It can actually be great foreplay. I've given this assignment to many clients, and they come back and say, we never realized how much the tension, the underlying everyday tension in our relationship has been the wall that separates us sexually at night. But when we're able to break through that tension through the Slack method, to fall into each other's arms and possibly make love feels so much more natural and organic because there is trust and there is intimacy there already. So that's my favorite method. Can't say I
love it
every single time, but I would be better if I did.
I have this vision of you and Charlie, both of you, being educated in counseling, that like you sit down and you look in each other's eyes, and yes, this is what you're advocating, but it's very calm arguing, like counselor arguing.
I will say that most of the time it is, but we are still hurting little girls and boys trapped in grown people's bodies.
Yeah.
And sometimes we still get triggered, and it often has to do with how we felt in previous marriages. And we just assume that we're being treated that way again or whatever. But oftentimes the case is that we were reading the situation wrong. And that's another tactic. Consider that the storyline that I'm telling myself about this situation may not be accurate. For example, in Charlie's previous marriage, he felt highly ignored. His wife traveled for work, and when she was home, there was just a lot of Facebooking and that sort of thing going on. So he just felt as if she never really took the time to connect with him and communicate with him. So he felt ignored and marginalized. But yet he is an introvert. And so there are times when I realize, you know what? He's getting a little cranky. I'm starting to feel like I'm walking on eggshells a little bit. So I'm going to take a step back and give him some breathing room. I'm going to let him have his introversion time, man cave time, without me asking and interrupting. So I take a step back. But then when I notice him start to pout, I realize, okay, he has misinterpreted. He is assuming that I'm ignoring.
Right, that you're ignoring.
What I'm trying to do is honor his need for that man cave time type of a thing. So always ask for clarification if you're confused or bewildered by your mate's actions, because it may be that they thought they were doing you a favor, or they thought they were doing the right thing, and that you're reading it wrong because you're looking through an old lens. And sometimes we just have to throw away those old lenses and get new prescriptions. So,
and the thing I would say, the thing I would say too, I think that's really good, not operating from a place of assumption. The other thing I would say, the technique I would give is read the room, meaning when we are hungry, when we are tired, when there's these other factors, like I think we grow in our maturity when we recognize when there is good space and energy to be able to address hard topics. And that's not to say you have to be careful with that, because you could perpetually put them off. But I mean, I just know, like, if Randy's hungry, like, we are going to not accomplish anything in a deep conversation. And that's just real. That's honest. If either of us is way too tired, like, that's not the time to probably dive into something big and deep and hard and consequential. So I call it read the room, like understand the other factors going on in that moment.
Yeah. Another stress. Another parameter that I like to put around our argument sometimes is I'm not looking for this to be a long drawn out conversation, but I do feel the need to make my feelings known about something. And so, for example, just Sunday, we had a situation where he did something at church that highly upset me. I'm not sure exactly why, but I just know that I was deeply emotionally triggered by it.
Right.
And so on the way home, 20-minute ride, within the first 5 minutes, I said, my goal is to have this conversation completely done and smoothed over by the time we arrive home. But here's what happened, and here's how that made me feel. And I think that it was a total of 6 or 7 minutes, and literally we were done. So putting limits around it to where you're just asking for your feelings to be heard and validated, and then you can move on and not harp on it. Cause I think that that's a really sensitive spot for a lot of people when their mate gets on a topic and then just harps and drones on and just digs and digs and digs and hits that raw nerve over and over again. I think that that is probably the reason behind that. What is that passage of scripture about a nagging wife being like a dripping?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
piggyback on that, just though, state it and move on.
To piggyback on that, though, I think couples also need to give themselves permission to put a pin in something. So like if something like
come back to
can't
it,
be, that it's okay that you can to just give voice to that. Say, okay, I can see maybe this is bigger than I initially thought it was, or can we please circle back to this maybe in a few days or tomorrow or something like that.
Yeah, especially
with the heart intention. Right. Right. Yeah.
So we've been talking from the perspective of the one who is hurt. If we step into the other person's perspective, there are some things that I constantly keep in my head when Jonathan is the one who's hurt. So when he expresses a feeling to me, I don't ever get to say, no, you don't feel that way.
Right.
Like we do not invalidate or question the other person's feelings.
Right.
We also, we don't think of how to put this. We don't get to insert ourselves into their struggle. It's their struggle in which to include us. I was also thinking that about defensiveness. So when Jonathan comes to me and shares what he's feeling, it's never appropriate to immediately say, well, I'm feeling blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. To try to one up each other. Like, oh, you think you're in pain. Well, let me tell you about my pain.
It is totally okay to come back to your pain and your perspective, but not immediately following what the person has said. Completely invalidates. Yeah. Thinking about those things. So Shannon, going back to your parents' argument in the car,
gonna pull
the thing that I have to say, I say all the time is, let me make sure I understand what I hear you saying. So, if your dad had said that, then your mom could have slowed down a little bit with the Alabama drawl and he could have heard her, but then that would have led to a lack of lifetime of cow stories.
We would have missed out on the legacy.
So, I mean, I had everything happens for a reason.
I had to recreate the experience of passing by a pasture full of cattle just so I wouldn't think of my parents arguing every single time. And here's how I did it. Are you ready? Okay, so if you're passing by a green pasture full of black cattle and you throw your eyes out of focus, it just kind of looks like chocolate mint ice cream. And that was my granddad's favorite.
Okay,
try it. It's a very positive connotation. Okay, so I have to tell you why I was giggling earlier, circling back around to our opening stories, talking about the praying mantis. Have you seen Bug's Life? I'm sure that if you raised children, you probably saw Bug's Life. So
in a while.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's been a hot minute.
So it's stick bug season here in Springfield, Missouri. I'm seeing stick bugs everywhere. And so I snapped a picture of one and sent it to my son, Matthew, because Bug's Life was one of his favorite. And I said, I'm the only stick with eyes, because that's the famous line from the stick bug in Bug's Life. And then I saw 2 stick bugs mating, which is a really, in my opinion, an unusual sight.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then I saw a second stick bug couple mating the same day. And I was like, what are the chances? And I'm sure that my son was just like, oh my God, mother, like I'm 27 years old. Why are you sending me pictures of bugs having sex? But the
I
reason,
love it.
Because you're Shannon Ethridge.
Why are you not sending these pictures to Angie and I?
well,
I
Come
want to see
on.
it. Now I'm curious. Now
well,
I
and
am
one time we were
curious.
actually telling him that, you know, we don't ask questions about sex of our peers because your peers probably don't know
Right.
much more than you do. So if you have questions about sex, you come to us, your parents. And he said, what about insects? INSECTS. He just wanted
He's
to
so
know, but what if I
cute.
have questions about insects
Aw.
instead of just sex? Yeah, he's a very
Aw.
Bugs Life kind of guy.
That's
He's so
adorable.
Isn't that
sweet.
cute? But then it also reminds me, back in the heyday of the Every Woman's Battle series, there was also another series that was just selling great guns by Stormy O'Mardian. Do y'all remember Power of
Yeah.
a Praying Wife, Power
Oh,
of a
yeah.
Praying
Yeah.
Husband, Power of a Praying Mom? Yeah. Well, Fred Stoker, my co-author, he was just like, yeah, but her next one's going to be Power of a Praying Mantis. I just cracked up.
Oh,
I
goodness.
like that now whenever I see a praying mantis, I'm not going to think about stick bugs having sex. I'm not going to think about Stormy O'Mardian's next book. I'm going to think about after we have sex, but before I kill you, I need you to help me with some shelves.
Right. Me too.
That's a classic.
I mean, it really
Fine.
indicates what's most important to you,
Absolutely.
The shelves.
right?
The shelves. Yeah.
The shelves.
I
mean,
get
that's the
it.
priority.
I get shelves are like vital to life. I think
Right.
that that's what sets us
Mhm.
one step above the animal kingdom is
The running joke in our house is because Randy's a mechanic by trade, and so of course I've never had to pay for any work on our cars or oil changes
Nice.
or any of that. And I always tell people I'm like, well, I sleep with my mechanic, so I don't have to. I don't
it's
have to
better
work.
when Jonathan gets to say, well, I sleep with my pastor.
There you go. That's good. Yeah, I like it.
I can't top those,
Okay.
ladies.
Let's talk for a second about forgiveness.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Forgiveness. We forgive for ourselves. Forgiveness does not need to be mutual. We forgive so that we can be whole. And withholding forgiveness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die.
Yeah.
That's a phrase from our 12-step friends. But reconciliation, which is what we're seeking in our partnerships, reconciliation does require both people. And it requires humility. It requires an apology. It requires understanding what the offender has done and how that affected the one who was offended. So the apology, I am sorry for everything wrong I've ever done to you. This is not an apology. People.
Wow.
Right.
What a big
That
blanket.
is, yes, that is a cop-out. So understanding, getting to that point, like I was talking about with Jonathan, of really understanding what I've done so that I can take responsibility for it and offer an apology that gets to the heart of the matter is essential for reconciliation to take place.
Well, and then the rebuilding of trust. So yes, definitely. I agree with everything you just said, that it's not just, oh, I forgive you, you forgive me, let's move on. Like when there's been some deep hurts, deep betrayals, whatever it might be. And it's everybody's definition of what's deep. I mean, that's like what is deep for one person may not be for another, but regardless, it's that next process of how do we rebuild trust? And that can be messy, hard work. But the couples who do it, especially couples who've gone through like deep betrayals and they go through all that stuff, what you've just talked about, it's just phenomenal. You know, I've heard some people think, oh, I don't know how anybody could survive an affair, like in a marriage that could survive an affair, but yet we all know couples who have. I mean, who've done, but it's because there's been that humility and that accountability and that specificity about it wasn't just a blanket. You're right. I'm a bad husband. I'm sorry for everything I ever done. Or I'm a bad wife. I'm sorry for everything I ever done. It's about doing that hard, humble, genuine, intentional work of rebuilding trust. And the couples who do it, it's messy, but it's quite phenomenal when you see couples come on the other side of that.
I think that trust would be a great topic for future multiple episode podcast for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, to piggyback on what you just said, Angie, it is not an apology when you say, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, when your partner has just made it clear that you did. I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. It's amazing how just one word makes such a big difference. That instead of if goes a long way.
I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings by doing this is kind of the full formula.
And even better, I'm sorry that I made you feel that, fill in the blank, like reiterate what their feelings, what you understand their feelings to be. So I hope that this has been an enlightening conversation. If anything else, I hope that what you derived out of this is that it's normal to fight, but it's normal to move beyond it and really healthy when it evolves into mutual respect and trust and even admiration and appreciation and hopefully some great makeup sex. If you would like to chime into this conversation about fighting like lovers do, if you've maybe developed a really great strategy for your own relationship that you would like for us to share on air at some point, I hope you will email me, Shannon@shannonethridge.com. Julie, how can they email you?
They can email me at jkseibert, and it's S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, ERT at cox.net.
I'm sorry.
jkseibert@cox.net. I know, right? Like, I don't ever want to change my email just because of that. Like, I love having that on my business card.
Cox.net.
Cox.net, yeah.
Angie, top that one.
I can't.
They want to email.
Pastor Angie at msn.com.
Boring.
Boring.
We thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sexual Confidence on Tap with Shannon Ethridge and friends. We love you for listening.
And we thank you
for tapping on us.